So if you have all the money in the world and then you don't have to worry about childcare, you don't have to worry about your job, will you have a third kid?
Yes.
Definitely.
To say that money is not a factor for me would be a lie because
Welcome to Singapore Unpacked, a podcast by the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore, where we turn research into conversation and policy into stories. I'm your host, Liang Kaixin, Associate Director at IPS, and as some of you might know, a former journalist with a soft spot for asking why. In this series, we're diving deep into IPS's latest research projects and policy updates in Singapore, bridging the gap between data and daily life. Today's episode is on large family scheme, where it nudge families to have a third kid. And we have today Dr. Kalpana Vignehsa, Senior Research Fellow at IPS, and we also have Peggy Teo, mom of two kids, aged 3 and 1, right?
yes, that's right.
Yeah, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kaixin.
Thanks for joining us. So definitely we know about the new budget announcement, the large family schemes that has 3 benefits. It will provide substantial financial support for parents who give birth to a third or more child, right? And then the financial support is like probably more than $16,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are your first thoughts about this new scheme? I know Kalpana wrote an op-ed on it, but I think we want to ask Peggy first.
I am actually on the fence whether to have a kid. So I think I fall into the group maybe the government wants to target. But well, I appreciate the financial support that the government is trying to provide the citizens. At the same time, I'm not really convinced because monetary support is subjective, right? And also relative. So it depends on what kind of choices you make for your children to determine whether 16,000 you feel will push you over that fence to have the third child. And for me, well, I made the choice to make sure that my children are in a very near preschool, and that means it's a private preschool. And 16,000 covers like maybe less than a year for 2 of my children. For some, I'm sure, that amount is very significant to them. And I don't think I fall into that group because I do feel there are a lot of other considerations for me, such as, the stress because of the lack of time, and then burden on, say, the families, whether it's myself or grandparents, and then also my career, which I feel like just got a restart in a sense. And then do I take a backseat again for like 1 year? Yeah.
We'll come back to you again. Maybe we'll go to Kalpana. You have 2 kids too, right?
Yes, I also have 2 kids.
Yeah.
The way I see it, I totally see where Peggy's coming from, because financial support is always like very relative to your decisions that you make as a family, etc. But I also appreciate that it is a substantial amount of support, and we're always doing research in this space. I'm always talking to so many people, and I also see in the data that raising children a lot of people find it very prohibitively expensive. So, providing that support is definitely better than not providing that support, and I think it's a good moving in the right direction. My perspective on the large family scheme is that, as a measure just to provide support to families who are having 3 children, fine. But if the objective is to actually help us raise the birth rate and convince more people to have a third child, I'm not sure that it's going to be that effective, because the fraction of families having newborns, a third child, is just quite a small one. Third or more is quite small. I think it's about 18% of all newborns
Most people
born.
stop at 2, right?
Most people stop at 2. And in fact, because the data that when we look at the data, we're kind of seeing historical data, because you're looking at women who've now just gone past their childbearing years. So when we look at what's happening amongst a younger cohort of women, we see that couples are maybe even stopping at 1, maybe
not having
even
kids.
not having kids at all. So to me, is it going to actually motivate people to have a third? I feel like it might be too big a jump for most people. Like it might be a more successful policy in terms of increasing the birth rate if we actually use it to target a much larger group of people so the people who are having one kid who might be considering two kids. And there's also the factor of the 2-kid norm being quite entrenched in Singapore. So even for those people who just have one child, many of them do feel like they might want a second child. The desire to give your first child a sibling is also still quite strong in the population. So some data that I wrote about in the op-ed was that amongst those who had one child, 54% wanted a second child. But that drops to 22% when you ask those who already have 2 children. So only 22% of those parents want to have a third child. So you can already see the dramatic difference between the two. So yeah.
Okay. So Peggy, back to you, right? So if you have all the money in the world and then you don't have to worry about childcare, you don't have to worry about your job, will you have a third kid?
Yes.
Definitely.
To say that money is not a factor for me would be a lie, because there's always a amount, right? Like you tell me 16,000, okay, that maybe won't push me, but maybe ask me like 100, 200,000. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think that would be very significant, because I can not feel bad for not working. I would, be able to get the support that I need, whether it's for me physically, mentally, because it is quite stressful, taking care of a newborn and then operating on very low sleep. So, I mean, I've been there twice, and that actually, it makes me scared for the first 2 years of a new kid's life, because I would just, fully focus on that whole like baby.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think it was very interesting because just now you said that you just went back to work, right?
Yeah.
So what made you have the decision to stop work for a while to have your 2 kids?
Actually, there were many reasons, and it just all fell into place. So I was working when we decided to try for our first kid. And unfortunately, I do not know whether it's the stress from work or chromosomal issues, but I did have a miscarriage, and it was many years ago.
Okay, sorry about that.
It's okay, I'm fine now. And it made me stop to think, like, because that time I was planning a brand conference, and it was unfair for me to, like, I suddenly felt like lying down because I was tired, but I couldn't do that when everyone was just chipping in. We had colleagues flying in the region, and I'm like, I can't, like, oh, sorry, boss, I'm like tired.
I need to lie down.
Yeah. And no way I could do that. A couple of years later, my husband, he had to go overseas for his master's. And then at the same time, I was thinking, okay, we want to try for a first kid, so maybe I should quit my job, and then we try. But nothing happened, and then COVID hit, and then we came back. And then that's when I really started, looking at fertility doctors and all that. And it took some time, but then we finally had our first kid in 2021. I mean, I felt bad if I were to apply to a job when I came back after the overseas stint, and then tell the boss, like, hey, you know what, I'm thinking of getting pregnant, and they have to accept that I would be out of work for 4 months for the maternity leave at least. And I did not want that stress also on whether the company or on myself. So I made that conscious decision to not look for work when we came back. And then one child, and then we wanted a sibling, I fall into that statistics actually. It's either 0 or 2 for me. In fact, I wanted 3 when I was young, because I actually have 2 siblings myself. We then had a second kid, and that's when I felt like, I need some balance in my life. Stay-at-home mom was not what I envisioned myself from the very beginning, and I think I don't suit that lifestyle. I love my kids, of course, and I like to spend a lot of time with them, but having time for myself, and work is actually time for myself, really helps me to become a better parent. So that's why I decided that I will go back to work, but part-time. And then I had a very understanding and good boss who actually gave me that opportunity. Of course, I took a pay cut. I no longer earn like what I was earning, and that's okay, because now I prioritize my kids, and I acknowledge that, I can't have everything at one point in time.
Okay. But Kalpana, so what do you think about this? Because if you are going to try to encourage Singaporean women to have a third kid, what is going to happen to their career, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a hornet's nest, really. And I think, part of what's going on is that we've had a lot of rapid change in social norms, and women have really kind of they now we have very high labor force participation for women in Singapore, and more women are graduating from university than men, slightly more, right? And so you can expect that for many women, they kind of envision that they're going to be contributing to society via having a career of some kind. And so I feel like the whole topic of increasing birth rates really we have to talk about what's happening in the workforce and how whether it's possible to comfortably have kids, and if it is not, and like you get pregnant and you're tired, and I have been there, what kind of work environments do we want to create to make it possible for women to both have children when they are in their childbearing years, and at the same time not sort of have to necessarily fully step away fully from work if they don't want to. Obviously, if you'd like to, that's fine. But I think there are lots of people for whom the career question weighs heavily, both on whether they should have a child in the first place, or whether, like, I've had one child, I want to now go back to work. I don't want to I don't want this time to be extended for much longer. So I feel like this is a big area of work that we need to do in Singapore, because we haven't quite found that balance.
Yeah, definitely. Because like if there's 4 months maternity leave for one kid, so 3 times 4 will be like 12 months and that's a full year away from work. And in between, who's going to cover your job? Who's going to, how are you going to answer to your boss and all that? It's not easy, right? Yeah, and of course, like we do hear of working mothers who say that, like, the year that they were pregnant and giving birth, they were overlooked for promotion.
Yeah. I get people contacting me actually from the public sometimes and say this happened to me, or, because sometimes I write about issues that are relevant, and it's definitely something that bugs a lot of women. When they are at work, they feel like, oh, I'm giving my all, but then I'm also the person that has to give birth to the child. So how do I do that? They don't, I guess it's that figuring out of like, I don't want to feel penalized by having kids from the career perspective. But then also from the parent perspective, it's, like you have children now, we're not in a situation like in the past, people had many children, and sometimes for very, very different reasons. And now I think parents who choose to have children, they want to spend time with their children. They want even 4 months is like, it's
not enough.
That's not enough, and you go through, I'm sure Peggy she's been through it more recently than I have, but you go through falling pregnant, being pregnant, having the baby, going through those, first few crazy months, and that kind of bonding phase, the early bonding phase, at least the research tells us as well, it's a good sort of 18 to 24 months where your child really needs their primary caregivers quite significantly. So 4 months is a tiny fraction of that.
Okay. Peggy?
I was also someone who did not have kids, in the past. So I understand.
Everyone started off.
Yeah, right. And we picked up the slack for colleagues who had to take childcare leave or who were pregnant. And
were you resentful at the time?
I was not actually, although I did not fully understand the scale of what they were going through. But, to me, they were entitled to it. We just have to pick up the slack. But how long can a colleague pick up someone's slack if they decide to have 3 kids, 4 kids, 5 kids? Like at some point you'll be like, hey, like, is this what I'm like, should I be doing this for like many years? And as much as someone wants to be very productive or, produce all the quality work that they can, 4 months away is significant in a year. It's a quarter of a year. And I mean, I acknowledge, as much as I want to cite, mothers who really need to be there for their children, and also maternity leave and all that. But as the colleague who has to pick up the slack, it's difficult also. And I get the company's point of view. So it's something very tough. Like, I understand both sides, and, it is time away no matter what.
Kalpana, maybe you have some answers.
Oh, I think that there's a more systemic issue here, because I feel like, we are not looking at all the possible options for how the workforce might manage these issues. So, for example, when a colleague goes on leave, especially when the government is paying for that leave, the employer can choose to use what would have been the colleague's salary to, reimburse the people who are stepping up, so they don't feel like they're doing kind of like
Too much work,
or they're being recognized and rewarded for the additional work. But I understand that also is not feasible. Like, people don't necessarily want 1.5 jobs or two for one jobs, even if they get more pay. So the other thing is, actually the creation of a leave cover industry where it becomes the kind of more normal for people to step in a contract role to cover the person going on leave. And this is how in countries where much longer maternity leave or parental leave in general is normalized, this is how they generally manage it. And they have managed it for decades. So there are kind of always, when you look for jobs there, or you will see parental leave position, right? Might be for 1 year, might be for 1.5 years. And so when you have leave systems where people can take longer periods of leave, could be paid, could be unpaid, or a mix of both, then you have this sort of like, you have a workforce. There are loads of people who want contract jobs for those periods. It's built into the system. HR supports the contract person coming in, supports the permanent employee going out for a while. And there's also a lot less anxiety because you don't feel like you're going to lose your job. It's protected in the system.
That was your experience, right?
Yeah, that I was lucky enough to experience that because I had my first child in Australia, and I actually hired my own replacement employee. And then I also, with HR support, I also trained her. And so the cost to the employer in terms of the effort and stuff like that, I actually bore a lot of that myself. But it was a very, positive experience. I didn't have a lot of anxiety. I knew that, like everybody else who went on parental leave, I would come back, my position would be there. And it also allows organizations the ability to like spot talent. So if they really like the contract person, they'll find a role for them somewhere else. So it can actually be a win-win situation.
But what about flexible work arrangements then? Peggy, you're experiencing something like this right now, right?
Yeah,
in a way?
So I'm actually quite lucky that I kept in touch with my previous company. And the boss, I'm very appreciative that she recognized my contribution, and she feels that I can, bring something to the table to the company now. She hired me back on a scheme where I will be paid for as much time as I put in. So like a consultant, paid by the hour kind of arrangement. And she acknowledges that I will have childcare emergencies. Like, the childcare can call you and say, oh, your kid has a fever, you have to bring home immediately. And these things happen, especially for younger kids. And she is very okay that I suddenly just don't or am not able to show up for work. So I remember the first time when I actually told her when I was going to start, which was October. And I was not really used to organizing work with, the kids' schedules. And I actually planned for my first day to be when my kid was going to have his first performance in school. And I really overlooked that. I was like, oh my God, how could I have done this? And I was very apologetic. So I called her up. I said, I'm so sorry. You know, I know that I told you I could start on X date, but I realized that it's my child's first performance and I want to be there. And she said, Peggy, you don't have to be sorry. I hired you knowing that you will have such situations. And for me to judge you because of that, then I am not honoring my part of the agreement. And
nice
I am not having the mindset.
Boss.
Yeah, she's amazing.
But is she a working mother also?
She is not. She's
wow.
Yeah, she's single and she has no kids, but she's so understanding. And she told me to not worry and just go for the performance and start work the next day. And I was so appreciative. So I knew that she was walking the talk. She was not just, I understand that you have kids, but when it comes to something that, you know, messes with the schedule, she's like penalizing me for that. So she actually walks the talk.
She's very nice about this.
Yeah.
But then what about the breastfeeding part? What about this arrangement at the workplace?
I think, okay, so for me, my kid now is 19 months. So I have stopped that. I've stopped breastfeeding. But I do feel that companies should step up to allow mothers to have the space to, you know, whether they want to pump at work, to have a comfortable space so that they don't get penalized for having to express milk for their children and then store it and then bring it home. I know that some professions have more difficulty than others, but for those in the office setting, you know, it shouldn't be that the mothers have to make the choice to pump in the toilet. At least have like a meeting room where they can book.
A nursing room,
or
right? Even.
Yeah, nursing room would be great. I think if we're advocating for more companies to be understanding and to have nursing rooms.
Yeah, I had a friend who's very terrible. He's a guy. And he told me that every time his female colleague goes to express the milk, right, he can hear it. He can hear the electric sound.
And it bothers him.
Yeah, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, so I think it's also quite uncomfortable for the mothers, right? If they are doing, they're expressing the milk and then, you know, your colleagues can hear it.
Yeah, if only he knew how uncomfortable it was to actually pump
right.
in the first place.
Yeah, and to not pump would be even worse.
Even worse. You know, it's a kind of a, I think we, on the topic of that flexibility, right? I feel like there's so much room for colleagues, for employers to really look at what is their, like, what are their needs, right? What are the work needs? So I was very lucky because my work is outcome based. With both my kids, it was like, I don't care where you are doing your work. I don't care if you're doing it in the middle of the night. I don't care how you get it done. I want to make you feel as comfortable as possible. So if it's more comfortable to work from home for that period of time, the employer realizes they don't lose anything by providing that. What you actually gain is you gain an employee who's very grateful for that. You know, you gave me that support. You supported me to have that the ability to give that to my child. I think that's quite powerful, you know. So I feel like as employers as well and as colleagues, what exactly do we lose if we can actually provide ways to work around and support mothers who are breastfeeding?
Yeah, but there's always the SME bosses around, right, who wants the workers to be always be there, right, and then the boss can look at the person working.
Yeah, I think companies do have to have that mindset shift.
Yeah,
if you want to support you know, people having more kids.
Yeah.
So for example, if you see a colleague in the morning and not at their desk, and let's say you're on leave and then you see a colleague, if your first thought is that this person, wow, how come so free? Is this person slacking or what? But maybe that person was sending the child to school.
Yeah.
Because maybe the other parent could not, or whatever reason. If we think like, okay, we should shift the mindset to, is that person productive? Is he still delivering? If he is, why am I caring that he is not at work at his desk?
Yeah.
So, you know, sending kids to school, picking them up because they're sick, like these are some emergencies that, parents have to take on. And if the company is understanding, then it helps a lot.
Yeah. And let's face it, I mean, even for people who don't have kids, we live in a aging society. You will have other people to look after. And also elderly people have fewer people that they can depend on because they had fewer children than they. So I feel like this whole thing about, immediately coming to the worst conclusion, we need to move past that, because people have various life needs that they need to attend to. And I understand that obviously, like, if you are in a job where you need to be there, that's a different kettle of fish. But there's so many jobs where it's about whether you are pulling your weight, whether you're doing what you're supposed to do, whether you're delivering. And so, we should really be shifting towards that.
Okay. Yeah. So coming back to the large family schemes, I mean, I'm just looking at the schemes in more detail. So newborn kids, they will receive a double child development account, first step grant, 10K out from the current 5K. Mothers will receive a $5,000 large family MediSave grants, offset pregnancy and birth costs. And also, I think SG credit scheme, right? Yeah. You will get $1,000 annually in life SG credits. So, enough? Useful?
Well, of course, it's better than nothing.
Okay.
But like I said, if it's used to push me over the edge to have a third child, I would have a lot more considerations. Yeah.
Okay.
Kalpana? I think it is put together. It's it's nothing to be sneezed at, but it is also at the end of the day, I think nobody has a child because the government's dangling a small carrot in front of them. We don't live in that kind of society. You're not, it's a kind of, I think the decision to have a child is a very personal one, which is why I'm advocating that we should really focus on the people who want to have children, want to have more children. And the other thing about having the decision to have children is that it's sequential. So if you have a child who, has special needs, or even just a child who cries a lot, obviously you're not going to be thinking about, I can have my next child so soon, because you'll be extra tired. You'll be, there'll be so many factors. So you don't make I remember I would have liked 3 children. That's what I thought. After I had my second child, I was like, okay, thank you very much. And so I think it's about focusing on that group of people who want to have children and then providing the support for them, as opposed to thinking, is this amount of money enough amount of money to persuade everybody to have another child? I don't think the decision making quite works that way. And of course we can also, and so then when we're talking about support, we can think about the best possible ways to be supportive to parents, and like we've been talking about the workplace, but even things like, I was trying to use my daughter's CDA account to pay for her preschool fees, and it is so 1990s, like it's so cumbersome. So I had to fill in a form by hand, send it in. Then the preschool contacted me to tell me that the bank needs to verify my signature, so I need to go to the branch just so that the money can be taken out. And we think about all the other banking we do. This is a far cry. This is like 1990s banking. You turn up with your passbook and you get verified,
Okay.
So I feel like there's also room for us to think about the type of support that we are giving. How easy is it for that support to be used? Can we make it easier? Are there other things that can be done to really kind of make that support easy to use?
Yeah, I do agree with what you said. And like you said, having a child is a very personal one, and nobody has a thought like, if I have $20,000, oh, maybe I will have a third kid tomorrow. Like nobody has this thought. And for me, it's a lot about the other factors, like the stress.
Okay.
I'm a person who actually likes control. And we know when you have kids, there's no way, there's control at all. So it is stressful to me taking care of the children. Of course, they bring a lot of joy and all that, but it doesn't take away that baseline stress that is higher from pre-kids. And then I do depend on my parents for a little bit of picking them from school sometimes when I can't make it, if I have work. And then they will be burdened if I have an extra child, which it will also weigh heavily on my consideration. And yeah, just my mental health and physical health. So like I said, I really like breastfeeding as it builds the foundation for a parent-child relationship or mother-child relationship. And it's important nutrition for them in the very first few years of their life. I strongly believe in that. And for me I was lucky that I did not have to go through that when I had 2 children while I was breastfeeding them. But to go through the third one when my career just started, and then to live in 3-hour cycles, co-sleeping with them, and then, having to go back to work with a foggy mind, I don't think that really attracts me to have like a third child. And
But you say you were on the fence.
I am actually, but I have to get through that part. So my own mindset if I tell myself like, okay, I'm ready to get through the hard part of the physical and mental toll on my body for the first 2 years. If I get through that, I think I will be more okay to have a third child. I think my struggle is that, more on that.
What about the husband then?
My husband actually is very supportive. Like, his presence just calms me down. So, okay, so this is the part where I feel like his job affects me greatly because his presence at home actually is stabilizing for me. And he is actually very supportive. So like if the kid melts down, sometimes, we are just too overwhelmed and I take a step back, he will be the one to step in and to stabilize the situation. So I actually need him a lot at home, especially for bedtime, because now we have 2 kids. To put them to sleep with them, to manage their nightmares and whatnot. And then he has to travel for work, sometimes 1 week, sometimes 2 weeks. And then I will be like, oh my gosh, who is managing bedtime with me? And then I will have to take that toll myself. I mean, I'm prepared to do it because he's traveling for work. But do I want to do that? 1 person with 3 kids, that's also a big consideration for me. So, I mean, if I had all the money in the world, I could hire a lot of people to help me with
nannies,
bedtime, nannies and all that. But, resources are finite. And I also make the choice that I want to accompany my children at bedtime because I do feel that there is a certain bond with the person that they sleep with. So it's about priorities. So now I prioritize my kids. I acknowledge I can't have that balance. So my career takes a back seat for now until I'm ready to go back full time, which I don't know when.
What about a helper? I mean, in Singapore's context, a lot of mothers, they use helpers to help them take care of kids. Do you think that would work? What about yourself?
I do have a helper, but I make the conscious choice that I want her alert and efficient in the day. So she helps me in the day when my kids are awake until when it's 9 o'clock, she goes to rest so that she can be refreshed for the next day in the morning.
Yeah.
Rather than, she pulls in so long hours, like it's just not humane also on them. And there's a limit to how much they can help. I know some kids sleep with their helpers and that's a choice that the mom makes. But for me, I want to sleep with my kids. Then I will have to sacrifice in the morning. Yeah. But my helper is there to pick up the slack for me in the morning.
Yeah.
So
no,
it's
I
balance.
pretty much do the same. It's very, very helpful to be able to have a helper. It's not easy to find a helper that really like fits in well with your household. And you have to kind of think about how you want to organize things. And so, yeah, I think is that transition of we live in these smaller nuclear families with fewer people, and having a helper around is like having that additional auntie or uncle, like the people around to pick up the slack. And because I have a helper, I can spend more time with the kids while she cooks dinner, for example. Like there's that balance. But I don't think you can run away from the early years being quite intense and stressful and very tiring.
Yes. And also, Peggy, just now your point about your husband being around as a calming presence, right?
Yeah.
So actually, it's not just the women who need like flexible work arrangements, right? The men should also have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that comes to point the paternity leave also, right?
Yeah. I think that parenting is should be evenly shared. After all, we take equal responsibility for being the child's parents. We might bring different things to the child, but I think that there's a lot of evidence now, growing evidence that, children benefit from involved fathers, and fathers also benefit from playing an involved role. It helps their health, it helps their marital satisfaction. It kind of helps them bond more closely with their family, which then obviously has a huge boon, long-term boon for them as they get older and whatnot, their relationship with their children going forward. So I think that fathers also, I think at the moment it's about 53% or something, the take-up rate of paternity leave, but we are still not, paternity leave is still, it's just a small amount. I think that is also a change that we are seeing in terms of, I guess, what women in Singapore would like, the kind of relationships they would like, kind of parenting relationships they want with their spouses and things like that.
Yeah.
Gone are the days when the husband just go out into work and not do anything,
Yeah,
right?
I think men also want to be involved. And if my husband had, but his nature of work is as such, and I also acknowledge. So in a way, we just have to like deal with it,
Yeah.
I think. But I'm grateful I have my helper. So at least the bulk of the day, there is extra pair of hands. We have a cleaner house.
Yeah.
Standard of cleanliness is definitely higher. You don't rewear like, clothes that are not washed,
Yeah.
So of course it's all the different balance. Not easy.
It basically reinforces the fact that raising kids requires many hands.
A whole village, right?
Yeah, I mean, they say, it takes a village to raise a kid, but really it does. And you do get, grandparents chipping in, helpers, mothers, fathers. And I think that, and to link it to an earlier point about how we might think about supporting our colleagues and, bosses might think about supporting their employees. It's this kind of, you really need everybody to feel like this is a very important, special thing that you're doing and you're all in it together. We get to, because as a society, when we say we want people to have more kids, they're going to have more kids if they feel like this is a supportive place to have more kids. The whole of society is like,
Right.
yeah.
And maybe you should ask your colleague that question. Why is she pumping at her desk?
No, not her desk, but it's like a separate room. But I guess
Still
the
can
partitions are
Oh.
bad or like
Thin walls.
Yeah, thin
Oh,
walls.
okay.
Yeah.
That's very
Yeah.
strange. But you see, like, it's a mindset thing. Like, many people don't really bat an eyelid when, the smokers take a smoke break. I mean, nothing against
bad.
them. Yeah, nothing
Yeah.
against them. But like when breastfeeding mothers take a break, not really a break, but like you
But
have
it's
to
quite a
pump.
while, right? Around half an hour, right?
It really differs.
Okay.
It depends on the pump, depends on many things. So,
Some people 10 minutes, some people 25 minutes.
yeah.
I used to do work with, put the pump on and you're still like doing stuff.
Yeah, but
It's
like
kind of it. I think it's not something. It's just a short period of time in a life.
Exactly.
The breastfeeding years go by very quickly. I think I breastfed each of my children for about 10 months each, and like it goes by fast. But it was so important for them.
Yeah.
When it happens. So
it is an important phase, and if colleagues could just understand,
understanding,
be more
right?
understanding that it's not affecting. So like this is the same mindset, right? Mindset change, right? Is her work quality the same? Is she as productive taking that, like, say 30 minutes, whatever it is, to pump? Like, it really doesn't affect anyone. I mean, apart from the sound, maybe he needs earplugs.
yeah. And I mean, on the topic of productivity, I think also people don't necessarily think I like when I had my first child, I guess my boss was quite visionary for his age. He said nobody actually thinks about all the new skills that a new parent has to learn, and crash course, intensive kind of training.
Yeah, you have to look after a new life.
You have
right?
you have to keep this new life, and it's an intense moment of creation. You've created this baby, and you have so much to do, and to think that those are not skills that can be translated into creating value at work is just very short-sighted. So I think that's also a kind of a really important lesson that I learned, right? So any new experience that you have, like, we don't have to just think about, okay, if they sent 10 emails a day before, are they sending 10 emails? It's about your growth as a person, right? And so from an employer's perspective, can we also see that this person is actually having this whole new, very intense, very comprehensive experience? Is that they will be a changed person coming back, and for the better. Like, I don't think all that additional responsibility training, it really is like a crash course in something quite intense. So yeah.
Okay, we have a colleague also who's in this space, and I think she came out with this thing about creating positive spillovers for large families. And then her ideas are quite interesting. Like maybe for the third kid and all that, they have like priority for primary school admission, or like priority for bigger flats, and even a separate COE category for large families. Peggy, I mean, this is the first time you might have heard of it. What do you think about this?
Well, I think it definitely helps. Although, okay, I did think about, like, if we have a third child, there's no space for the helper in the car. But my husband did say that logistics is the last thing that should be on your mind. Like,
you will figure it out, right?
Sort of.
Yeah.
So I think these are interesting and nice changes, but whether it really pushes me over the edge to say, okay, yes, I want that third child for sure. Yeah, I don't think it's very effective.
What do you think, Kalpana?
I think I go back to what I said earlier, in that the decision to have a child is very, very, it's very difficult to isolate and say, will this create more people who want to, or will that? I think the person has to feel like, I have enough support. I feel like I'm not going to be too penalized either what way, like whether it's that I have another child and I have enough time for all my children. I have another child, I can still contribute to society. If I have a career, I want to do that. I have another child, maybe there are other things that you want to achieve with your life, or maybe you have, and now we have more and more people who are in sandwiched families where they also have caregiving responsibilities for their, elderly parents. So I feel like it's a kind of a, when a person kind of thinks about and introspects about whether or not they can manage a third child or more children, it's a very holistic kind of introspection. And it was very clear to me, despite the fact that I had the desire to have 3 children, after a few months of experiencing a second child, I was just like, this is going to tip me over into.
Are you set in your decision?
And now I am, yeah.
Okay.
And
okay.
I was pretty set even then. Like, as soon as it kind of dawned on me, I was like, no, I think I'm at my limit. I think
right.
If I try to do more just because I want to satisfy that desire, my mental health will be affected. Just because it's your sleep, it's a kind of
I get you totally.
And so once that was clear to me, I thought, there's nothing more to think about here, because I'm not going to make a decision that, jeopardizes everybody and everything. Because so I feel like it goes back to, is there enough support to have a third child? Is it going to be, because you feel quite, and most mothers are also juggling some kind of employment.
Yep.
We feel quite hairy. There's just lots of things pulling on you, right? And so
I just want to ask if is age a factor also? Like if you started earlier, if you had your 2 kids earlier, would you consider having a 3rd kid right now?
Age is a factor in terms of your energy for sure, right? However, I stand by the fact that delaying childbirth for women who want to maintain their careers, right, is a great buffer for the parenthood penalties that you might face, because once you've achieved a certain level of advancement in your career, it's much easier for you. People understand what you can contribute, and it's much easier for you to negotiate that flexibility that you need, etc.
Okay.
Right?
So you need to achieve a certain level so that it's easier for
It's
you to leave
easier
work
for
for
you
1-2
to
years. is it?
or to make that, to say, I want, like with each of my kids, I actually took unpaid leave and took a break. But I when you have, if your colleagues understand who you are and what you can do, they are far more likely to say, no, we need this person. We want to keep having them around. We will be flexible about it. So I don't think it's a case of, I don't think it's so easy. We don't live in a society where, there are enough protections that it's naturally guaranteed that women make these decisions to ensure they can protect their careers if that's what they want as well.
Peggy?
And I guess it boils down to the bosses that you work for, that they value your contribution.
But if you turn time back, would you want to start earlier?
I actually tried much earlier, like I said. And sometimes it's also not within your control to have a family earlier or later. And for me, it just so happened that it was later, even though I did try much earlier. And I did have a cutoff. Like, I think above 40, there are real risks in terms of pregnancy. So I will not put my child or unborn child or myself through that risk. So if I can't make a decision and I'm 40, then I will not have a child. Another child.
Thank you for joining us on Singapore Unpacked. A special shout out to our researcher Kalpana and Peggy for joining us today, for shedding light on today's topic. If you enjoyed this episode, do follow or subscribe to the show, or leave a comment or share it with someone who cares about Singapore's future as much as you do. We want this podcast to spark conversation, so if there's a policy issue you'd like us to explore or a guest you recommend, reach out to IPS on Instagram, IPSSG, or visit our website, ipscommons.sg. Thank you all for listening in. See you on the next episode of Singapore Unpacked.